be proactive, be intentional, stop reacting, because every time you're reacting, the tail's wagging the dog.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Today I have another very special guest with me, John Nieuwenburg with W5 Coaching. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
John, before we get started, just give us a little bit of a background about you, your business. How did you get started? Just kind of 30,000 foot view, just so people can get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. Well, I'm a business coach. Been a business coach since 2004, so about 20 years now. The other answer, which is also true, is I've been a coach all my life. It was Steve Jobs who said you can only connect the dots going backwards, and I had a bit of an epiphany when I first started as a coach. And connected some dots. So I'm the eldest of 8 children, so you can imagine how that casts you in a role in life. I'm hardwired to be a teacher, and I knew that in high school, but those days that meant wearing a Harris tweed, sports coat and elbow patches, and that sort of institutional bureaucratic style of teaching didn't appeal to me very much. In the early 80s, I learned something called the Socratic method of leadership. So Socrates had it, the best way to help somebody is to help them figure it out for themselves. So I'm not you have to, you need to, you should business. I'm here to help you what's right for you. So that's the essence of coaching.
Yeah, I mean, it's the teach the man to fish, right? Then he can fish forever.
That's a motto I use to describe coaching all the time. Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. I'm in the teaching business.
Yeah. I love that. Well, there's lots to talk about. I think the audience is definitely going to resonate with a lot of things. As we were saying before we got started, you and I have a lot of the same opinions on things. But where I want to start with is you call it the chaos trap, and I call it the crazy cycle. So Explain to me what the chaos trap is, and then we'll go from there.
What I see a lot of is people who are complaining about one or all of 3 things: time, team, or money. So when it comes to time, you're probably saying, business owners are saying, I've got too much to do, not enough time to do it. I can't get everything done. If I don't do it, it won't get done. Team is, hiring good people is very difficult. Getting people to do work at the standard you want, getting the culture you want, those are hard. And then money has got 2 aspects. One part of money is I need proper financials, accounting, reporting, a dashboard, KPIs. I need to be able to measure results. And the other side of money is I need more money. I need better sales and marketing. So chaos flows when those things aren't in sync or aren't working in the way that they should. And just kind of build on that. Often when I first start with a client, they have what I describe as a burning bush. Almost a crisis in their business, something that's escalated to the point where they kind of reach a stage where they just recognize they can't deal with it anymore and they need some help. And that's when they, reach out to people like us to get some perspective and some help and a way to kind of break through the chaos that they're experiencing.
So I like that you have it broken down into time, team, and money. Let's talk about team just for a second, because this is always an interesting topic. You talked about culture, SOPs, things like that. Why is that so hard for contractors? Why is the team aspect so hard?
Well, in my experience, it's because a contractor, someone in the trades will spend 30, 40, 50% of their time focused on acquiring new clients, new customers, and all the work it takes to deliver great services. How much time do they actually spend on managing, leading, or recruiting? In your experience? Well, in mine, it's a tiny fraction of what they're doing in other areas of their business. So lots of times what happens is the only time they're doing recruiting is when there's some crisis. Someone quit and now they're jammed and, they're taking calls on Sunday. And so one of the things that I think ought to be in place is some kind of forecast of what revenue should look like, some kind of forecast of how we deliver, and some kind of forecast of how we need to staff in order to be able to do that. And so in a way, business is kind of like a metaphor I like to use is you've got a high wire act, and this is my balance bar. So on this side, I do all kinds of work to acquire customers. And on this side is all the work I do to be able to deliver the results that I need. And often they're out of whack. So when are you doing recruiting? You're doing that when you have a crisis. Well, so one of the things I recommend is that every key position in your business ought to have a bench. What's a bench? It's a farm team. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that if anything were to occur where you needed to hire someone, you can immediately pick up the phone and have 5 conversations with people who you've been cultivating over the last 3, 6, 12 months, so that you aren't kind of like throwing another ad on Indeed and hope some of that sort of sticks. No, I learned this lesson in the 70s. I was a store manager of a tip-top store, kind of a menswear, national menswear retailer. And in the 70s, Calgary, the city where I was, grew from about 100 to 500,000 people because the oil business was booming. Nobody was moving to Calgary to be in retail. And so one of the things we learned to do is about once a quarter, my boss, the local regional manager, and I would tour the mall where I was the manager of our store. And my job was to point out the 2 best salespeople that weren't yet working for me. So what does that mean? I'm bumping into them in the food court. I'm peeking around the corner, watching what they're doing. And so when something occurred, I was in a position where I could engage those people. Hey, how you doing? How's things? We've been talking for the last 6 months. How do you like where you're? And so business owners need to be actively engaged in recruiting routinely, and nearly to the same extent as the amount of effort it takes to get a customer. You've got to also keep in proportion what it takes to staff.
Yeah, I love that. So what you're talking about is being intentional, right? I mean, it's instead of being reactionary, it's being intentional with this.
Yeah, exactly right. Another example is I have a client who owns a physiotherapy clinic. There are 200 vacancies in the province, the state that I live in, for physios. And so they are constantly recruiting. They may have, let's say, 20 physios. They have a 10% turnover. That means immediately they need 2 physios just to replace churn a year. Well, they've got high offers out and start dates for people 3 months, 9 months from today. They don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but they're pretty sure that somewhere within a few weeks or a month or so of that place, 9 months from now, they're going to need somebody. So yeah, be proactive, be intentional, stop reacting, because every time you're reacting, the tail's wagging the dog. You know who's got the person with the most options has the most leverage or power. And what I mean by that in this instance is one of your workers has more power in the relationship than you do as the business owner. Why? Because they can decide to be late, they can decide to quit, and you're stuck. So how do you balance that? Well, you have to have options, meaning someone's late for the 5th time this month, and you're kind of biting your lip because I have to put up with it. No, you don't. Your power resides in having options, because that guy isn't going to change. If he's been late 5 times in a month, what is there anything you can do that's going to change that? Not very likely.
Yeah. Yeah, unless that, a lot of times employees want to kind of use as leverage, but they really have no leverage. It's so like you can, but it's still a lose-lose situation. Like even if an employee is using it as leverage against you, but he has no leverage, that's somebody that needs to ultimately be replaced by somebody else.
I agree 100%. Yeah, so always be recruiting is a motto. Another thing that I'd often ask a business owner to think about is, so hypothetically, how many team members, how many employees do you have? You have about 10. Okay. Hey, look at if you could start your business from scratch today, how many of those 10 would you rehire? Now, the most common answer I get to that is about half.
Yeah.
And so let's think about that for a minute. Are you telling me the bottom half of your employees are pissing off the top half? Are the bottom half of your employees pissing off your customers? And you're putting up with it? What would happen to your business if you get the bottom half to at least the current average of your team? How would that change your business? How would that change your life? What would that mean for customers and the delivery of the work you do? So ask yourself that question of my current team, how many would I rehire if I had a clean sheet of paper? You'll probably have your marching orders for recruiting from that question.
Well, I have, questions like that come up where, one of my clients, a message is, hey, my lead guy is acting like a fool and he's saying this and this and this. And I don't know, he's a good worker, but this problem, and they're on the fence, of like making a big decision. And I always ask them, very similar to what you're saying, which is, if you could hire the perfect employee for for this position, would you rehire this person? And more times than not, it's like, no, I wouldn't. I would probably find someone better. And I'm like, well, there's your answer.
Yeah. The other thing I'd comment on is people don't get fired for skills. He may be a great worker in the sense that he's great
Yep.
skills. They get fired for culture. They get fired for being difficult. They get fired. And so hire for culture, train for skills. And skills are relatively easy to teach. Culture is much harder to achieve. And so start with the idea, I'm going to hire the best fit for culture. And that means that you have a clear idea of what culture means. So if you were to ask most business owners in the trades, what's your culture? Here's the truth. You don't get the culture you want. You get the culture you deserve. So what are you doing today to implement, to embrace, to influence, to get the culture you're looking for? And if it's not documented, then you don't have the culture you have won't be the one you want. Or put a different way, why are the 10 Commandments written in stone? Why are they written in stone? We're not going to debate if thou shalt not kill as a commandment. The only thing left for us to discuss is, did you live by that standard or not? Well, if you don't have your points of culture, your culture documented, you're going around wondering, is thou shalt not kill a commandment? I don't know. Maybe. Well,
right.
I can promise you that if they aren't documented, if you aren't addressing them, then you won't have the culture you want. Even if in your mind's eye, you're clear about it, if it's not described at that level of detail, you won't have the culture you want. And that's probably why you're putting up with people that aren't living up to your expectations for how they behave and conduct themselves.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I've used those terms. I say the exact same thing. It's just amazing that a lot of small business owners, contractors, they don't understand how important the what I call the EQ stuff is in business, right? A lot of them are great craftsmen. A lot of them know how to build amazing things. But when it comes to the business side of it, the EQ stuff, the hiring, the sales, the marketing, the customer service stuff, they really, really struggle with it. And I just, I have theories on this, and I've asked a lot of guests this, but what do you believe is the reason why contractors struggle so hard with the EQ stuff in business?
Because it takes a shift in mindset. So a lot of contractors start, with themselves, a truck and maybe an assistant, and that turns into 3 guys, 5 guys, 10 guys, and they still see themselves as an operator, an electrician, a plumber, an HVAC technician. And they haven't really made the shift to being a owner operator. They're here. They need to be thinking about owner operator. And then the next shift up is they're the investor owner, which is entirely a different thing. So the example I like to use about this is, let's imagine you're a captain in the Navy and you have a 50-foot boat and the crew is 10, and you're the most qualified, trained engine room guy. How often is that captain in the engine room with tools? All the time. He's the guy. Other people are cooking or doing other things, right? All right, so now let's make you the captain of a 150-foot boat, and now the crew is 50. How often should that captain be in the engine room with tools? Maybe if there's a fire, an emergency. So the job is still called captain, but what that captain focuses on, what leadership looks like, what the job requires, is very different at the 150-foot level than at the 50-foot level. So let's make one more leap. Let's make you the captain of a aircraft carrier. And now there's 2,000 people on board. How often is that captain in the engine room with tools? Never.
Yeah, hopefully not.
He's there to give somebody a 20-year certificate, because now that captain has a guy who manages the guy. And so that means that captain, who started as the 50-foot boat guy, has somehow graduated, learned what is required of the role captain, business owner. Well, that role changes as your business scales. And so many business owners have never made that transition. They're still kind of stuck in the mode of, I'm a guy and I'm an HVAC tech and I just happen to have a bunch of other guys working with me, and they've never shifted and recognized, no, you're actually a leader. And what does leading mean? And how much of your time do you spend leading? So they're still kind of operating as if they were one guy in a truck and they just have 5 and they just do what they did, but times 5, instead of recognizing there's a requirement to shift, a requirement to think about what they do in a different way.
I'm thinking back to when I started my business, by myself, and then grew that with multiple employees. And it's true. Like if you don't have I forget, it was like 2000, maybe 2001-ish time frame, but Tony Robbins, one of his book, Lessons in Mastery. I don't know if you've ever read that, but it was like the first self-help CD set book audio book that I bought. And I remember buying that and, listening to it in my car. And he talks in there about 𝐚𝐭𝐜𝐡, constant and never ending improvement. That was an acronym that he came up with for himself. And I was like, I'm going to steal that and apply it to me because that's what I want to do. And so becoming a leader, becoming a better leader, it's all about constant and never ending improvement, right? And so if us as the owner, if we're not looking at this from, I really have to invest in myself and become a better person, then we're going to be stuck. And that's usually with my clients, people that I talk to, that's where it is. That's where a lot of that lives is, obviously with the owner, but a lot of them have the mindset of like hiring people, and the only responsibility they have is basically managing their schedule, right? Like I hire people and then I sell jobs and then they go produce them and I'm just managing their schedule. And that's the extent of what I call leadership. Talk a little bit about that mindset.
So when I think about coaching, it's got 3 components to it. So business coaching is about helping the business grow systems, tools, and strategy. It's also about personal coaching. And what I mean by that is mindset, skills around leadership, communication, delegation. And then the third component is accountability, or holding you accountable for the stuff you say you're going to do. The frank truth of most business coaching is personal coaching in disguise. The system is relatively easy, the things that you need to implement. The harder thing is to make the shifts. Well, first of all, in terms of your skills, leadership, communication, delegation, as well as the mindset shifts that you're talking about. Those are the harder things. First of all, recognize that they matter, and then to actually do the things it takes to make that shift happen. If there's any one thing you take away from this call, is do as Brad does, go to Windshield University. You spend a lot of time in your truck. You spend a lot of time driving. Instead of listening to sports radio, Audible's great, man. You can have podcasts are great. Why don't you learn? And you can't out-earn your learning. If you want to earn more, you need to learn more. Where can you learn? Well, Windshield University is pretty handy. You're taking the dog for a walk, listen to a podcast at the same time.
Yeah, but John, I just really want to listen to AC/DC when I'm driving around. It just helps me, kind of level out. I mean, why can't I just listen to music?
Well, you can, but why don't you make this deal with yourself? In the morning, on the way to the office or to your first customer, listen to something you can learn from. On the way home, at the end of the day, you want to decompress, listen to music. So, you don't, just because I've asked you to take an aspirin doesn't mean you have to take the whole bottle.
I like that. I like that analogy. Yeah, I mean, and just to add in here, like I listen to Audible all the time. I have hundreds of hours in Audible. I'm not the type of person that can sit down and read, even though I try to force myself all the time. Not very successfily. But I'll go in spurts where I'll listen to Audible and I just listen, for 2 months, I'm just listening to books and listening. And then I'll be like, okay, I'm not going to do that. And then maybe for 3 weeks, I'm just listening to music because I just I'm in a different stage. And so if you're listening to this, I'm giving you permission. Like you don't have to just constantly jam stuff down your throat because listening without action is obviously not going to help.
Sure. Yeah. Agreed. Find a, environment or system that works for you.
Yeah. Test it out. I mean, just try. See what works. See what doesn't work. Play with it.
There's a great story I like to tell about a guy named Shawn Achor. This guy's a stud. He's been interviewed on Oprah and Brené Brown and written several Amazon bestseller books, consulted in a bunch of different countries. So my point here is the guy's a stud. and he wanted to learn to play guitar. So he put a guitar in his living room, but every time he went into the living room, the default action was to pick up the TV remote because he just wanted to veg out. And 6 months later, he hadn't made any traction on learning to play guitar. So then he decided to change the environment. What he did is he took the batteries out of the remote, put it in another part of the house, 20-second walk away. Guess what happens now when he walks into the living room? The easier thing to do is pick up the guitar. So if you're currently not getting the behavior you want, it's because your environment allows that behavior to exist. Think of it, because your discipline, my discipline, none of us have enough discipline. It's a myth.
Yeah, 100%. And I have, Satan knows what my sins of choice is, which is comfort. So, I'm constantly being tested to be comfortable. And it's a challenge. And, I've identified areas in my life that if I take actions in these certain things, it starts off as just a little bitty deviation. And then, 3 weeks, 2 months later, I'm full blown into this bad habit that now I have to, get back out of. And so always being tested. And I just, back to what you're saying with the guitar, there's so many things you can do. Like if you want to read a book before you go to bed at night, when you get up in the morning, take the book off the nightstand and put it on the bed, put it on your pillow. So you physically have to move that book before you get in the bed. It doesn't mean you're going to read, but it's going to make you think about reading because you have to physically move that book. So just little things like that can make a big difference.
Yeah, James Clear wrote a book called The Atomic Habits. And one of the things he did is he wanted to drink less beer, which is not the same as no beer. Mm-hmm. So what he did is the beer used to be in the door of the fridge. You'd open the door. It's easy to just grab one and kind of thoughtlessly. So what he did is he put the beer in the back of the fridge. So that meant he had to kind of pull out the leftovers and the box with salad in it. And now there was a bit of like a little speed bump, a little strain for him. And that, even though it was like 5 seconds, that was enough for him to be more thoughtful. Do I really want this additional beer? So it's another example, like the book on the pillow, of things that you can do to set up the environment to encourage the behavior you're looking for.
Awesome.
Hey, just a quick time out from the show. If you're a frustrated contractor who's dealing with low profit margins, stuck working on the tools every day, or doing free estimates for people who are never going to hire you in the first place, I invite you to my private contractor community, the Profit Club, where contractors just like you are adding 2 to 3 times more profit each year without producing any more jobs and finally getting completely off the tools to never do another free estimate again. So if you're ready to increase your profits, stop doing free estimates and get off the tools, then all you have to do is click the link in the show notes to learn more about the Profit Club and see how it can easily 2 to 3 times the cash in your pocket, give you a proven sales process that will convert more jobs with ease and get you off the tools once and for all. And the best part is you can do all of this without having to produce more jobs than you currently are. Click the link to learn more. Now let's get back to the show.
Well, let's pivot here a little bit because I want to talk about something that I talk about a lot, and you have mentioned this: delegation versus abdication.
Oh my gosh!
And I use that word exclusively, abdication. Talk a little bit about that. What's the difference in those two things?
Well, what a lot of business owners think is delegation is they'll abdicate, and what that really means is that you'll ask someone to do something without any support, guidance, feedback, training, nothing. And now you're surprised why you're not getting the results you want. So there's a bunch of different reasons that this happens. One of which is a lot of business owners are what I'd call a hub and spoke manager. So they're the hub of a wheel. The rim is the business, and the spokes are everybody who rings, pings, and dings the owner every single time there's a question or a problem or something that needs to be handled. And in the beginning, owners are like, well, this feels good because it's important, and we get a little endorphin kind of rush. But over time, what happens is owners complain, like, why is nothing ever happening? Why do I have to be there for everything? Nothing. Well, it's because you've trained them that way. You've set the expectation that they got a problem. They call you, they get an answer, and they're off with it. And so they know that if they were to actually make up something on their own, they're probably going to be in trouble with you. So part of it is you induce it. You create it to. So one of the ways that you can change that is change how you respond to those rings, pings, and dings. The next time you get a phone call or a text or someone asking that question, there's a couple ways. If I wasn't here, what would you do? Listen for an answer. If it's about 80% in the ballpark, go with it. Even if it's not entirely perfectly right, give them the signal, the clue that they can think for themselves. Or another approach is a thing called a 1-3-1. So if you're going to call me, you can, no problem. But you've got a sentence or two to explain what the problem is. So I need you to define the problem. Then I need you to describe 3 possible answers, 3 solutions you've thought of. And then you're going to make a recommendation on which one you're going to go with. 1-3-1. And so in that way, you're actually teaching people how to think for themselves and which of those 3 ideas you're supporting. And so that breaks the chain of the rings, pings, and dings. The other thing is delegation means that you have expectations. And often those expectations aren't very well documented. So let me ask you, Ms. Business Owner, would you get on an airplane if you knew the pilot didn't do the pre-flight checklist? Of course not.
Oh, no.
Would you have an operation, let's say heart surgery? Now here we have a surgeon, 10 years of training, university, internship, highly trained, superior intellect, IQs, smart. And yet they're doing operations where they started with 30 scalpels and now there's 29 and they wondered what happened. So would you allow open heart surgery if you knew the surgeon didn't have a pre-operating and post-operating checklist? So how did they get those French fries?
They have that.
Yeah, exactly. How did they get those French fries to taste the same in your town or mine? The fries are made by a 16-year-old, and the parents of the 16-year-old can't get him or her to clean their bedroom. How do they do that? They have great systems. There's the process. Here is the recipe. Now, a lot of business owners will say, well, I'm not making French fries. I'm not doing the same thing, making the same product time and time again. Well, of course not. But here's the thing. The process you use to install kitchen cabinets, to produce, manufacture, install kitchen cabinets, that process has to be repeatable. Now, the outcome, the actual cabinets in this case, or the finishes, all of those details change from time to time. But if you have to make it up every single time, you can't scale that business. In fact, you're delivering problems every single time. So how do airplanes get off the ground and back safely? They have a checklist. This is the systematic way we go through the process of starting an airplane. And here's the systematic way we end that flight. This is what we do in surgery. This is what we do when we start in a construction project. If you don't have that, that's why you're saying to yourself, I can't trust anybody. You can't trust anybody because you're trusting people, not systems. Systems run the business. People run your systems. You lead your people. And if you're not getting the results you want, it's one of those 3 things isn't working the way it's supposed to. Systems run the business. People run the systems. You lead your people. And we've already talked about some of the gaps that happen with leadership. So what I'd say is delegation means that you provide appropriate training, appropriate instructions, appropriate processes, appropriate coaching, support, feedback, and then you're going to get work done at the level you need. And if you're not getting the work done at that level, it's because you're not doing one of those 5 things correctly.
Yeah, for those that are listening that don't know what abdication is, it's basically delegating something to someone with absolutely no checks or balances or no follow through whatsoever.
Exactly.
And that's where you usually get in trouble. And I know you see this, but whenever you read in the newspaper or hear somewhere, it's like so-and-so embezzled, $2 million out of this electrical company. And it's like, that is complete abdication.
Yes.
Like you don't give your general manager check writing privileges and then have no follow through or check through with how they use that money and spend that money. I just say it's so easy because it's almost always a blue collar type of business that falls prey to that.
Well, there's a current example of this in the news. The NFLPA, the NFL Players Association, just had its executive director resign. And he resigned before he got fired. And the reasons were that he was audited and was discovered he was using the corporate credit card to go to strip clubs. So it can happen in blue collar businesses, but it can happen in all kinds of businesses. And what you're describing, Brad, is there has to be a thing called segregation of duties. So one person can prepare the check, another person has to authorize that check. So in the old days, that was easy because we wrote paper checks. But nowadays, most banks have electronic facsimiles of that so that one person can prepare all the transactions and the payments, but you, the business owner, or a second party that you trust is the one that reviews and agrees and authorizes the actual release of the money. If you got one person doing both of those things, you're almost certain that that's going to lead to trouble.
Oh, absolutely. I actually recently had a lady that I went to high school with was arrested for embezzling $1 million from a property management company she was the manager of. So yeah, it can happen, and it happens all the time. And that's that abnegation part of it. It's like,
exactly.
You can't just hire someone, hire a lead guy, say, be at the Smith job Monday at 7:30 and get started on this deck, and then like never even show up, never have any onboarding, no training. Like that is you're building the bonfire for this, new hire to come in and light the match. And then we get frustrated and say, you just can't find good people anymore.
Maybe it wasn't a good person, but it almost certainly, if you've got 10 people behaving that way, all 10 have one thing in common, and that's you, the boss.
That's true.
Maybe you're the one who's the problem. Maybe it's something you're not doing it in the way it should be being done.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, and this might be a little harder stance, but I tell people all the time, if there's something wrong in your business, it's 100% your fault. It always will be. And I take the extreme ownership version of it, Jocko Willink, when it comes to problems in your business. You just have to be open-minded, and you have to remove some of that ego and pride to be able to, not take things personally and actually invest and figure out what it is.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it. What responsibility do I have in this circumstance that allowed this situation to evolve the way it did? What's my responsibility in that? We know, and it's easy to figure out what that other person did, but what part of it do you have to own? What is it about the system that allowed that behavior to occur?
Yeah, absolutely. Or continue, like for long periods of time. Is that you look the other way because they're a hard performer, or is it you didn't know what was going on because you had no checks or balances? So being able to just audit yourself and your business on a constant, I always call this like creating feedback loops, right? Like you need to have constant feedback loops in your business in order to know what's going on. If someone quits, do an exit interview. At that point, they don't have anything to hold back. It's like, hey, tell me what I did wrong. Tell me where we can improve and get that information.
If you want to do an even better job, get a third party to do that interview.
It's actually a good idea
too, because if you do it, that still will have a bit of a guarded conversation. If you have a third party do it who's skilled at that conversation, you're going to get fantastic feedback. You may not like all of it, but you'll get feedback that'll be helpful and actionable.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. All right. We got just a little bit of time left here. Let's talk a little bit more about systems. What does that really mean for small teams? Like beyond SOPs, rhythms, diagnostics, decision rights, and culture. Let's talk a little bit more about that. What is your take on all of that? What's your take on systems?
Well, let's talk about a practical example. So when I start with a business owner, I'm certain that they're spending 5 to 7 hours a week doing stuff they don't want to do. They're doing, and what I call that is the oh shit list. So tell me what's on your oh shit list. What's that? All the things that you do that cause you to think, oh crap, I have to do payroll, I have to do invoicing, I have to do payables, I have to do whatever it is, whatever causes you to say I have to, and it's tedious or odious or you don't like doing it. That reaction is your clue that you shouldn't do it anymore. So let me put it to you this way, Mr. and Ms. Business Owner. Do you have a virtual assistant?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't.
Well, here's the news. If you don't have a virtual assistant, you're the virtual assistant and you're crappy at it. So let's think about this for a second. What's your time worth? A business owner's time, they may be charging themselves out at 100 but notionally it's $200 an hour. Let's just say that's the value, notionally speaking. Well, then why are you doing work that someone will do for you better than you? not as good at, better than you, and they'll do it for $20 an hour. Why are you doing that work? Well, first of all, you have to kind of remove yourself from the day-to-dayness of your business and come up with that list. What are all the things that I do every day that aren't the highest and best use of my time? Or put it a different way, what am I doing that creates the most value for my business? In my case, what that happened to be is the thing that I do that creates the most value is talking to clients or prospects. So if it isn't one of those two things, I don't do it anymore. Literally, if it's not one of those two things, I don't do it. It's getting done. Someone's doing it. They're doing it actually better than me. And that frees me up to do the thing that generates the most value. So for lots of business owners, it's the work they're doing to lead their teams and the work they do to acquire customers. If you had more time to do that kind of work, what I mean by that, as an example, is how many business owners like doing estimates or quotes? Not very many. Well, why do you have to do the tedious part of the acquiring customers? The part of getting in front of a customer, having the conversation with a customer, outlining the goals of a project, well, that's work you ought to be doing. But once that's been done, someone else can do the tedious part because you can systematize the process of building estimates, of building quotes. That's a process that can be duplicated, repeated time and again. Yes, the particulars, the inputs have to change, but those inputs would be a 20-minute conversation between you and the person you have in charge of estimating. There's a site, you're probably aware of it, called Upwork. Mm-hmm. And Upwork is a place on the internet where freelancers of all kinds make their services available. My virtual assistant is in the Philippines. She's fantastic. And she works at a fraction of what it would take for me to hire that equivalent person in North America. Your bookkeeping can be done. Mine happens to be in Venezuela. The bookkeeping doesn't have to be here. And the $10 an hour that I pay that bookkeeper is real money to them. So I hired the VA. $10 an hour is what I started at. And when I hired that VA, I was kind of embarrassed. I thought, oh my God, I'm paying like babysitting money. But I looked it up, and the average income in the Philippines is $5,000 US a year. If you're paying someone $10 an hour, 2,000 hours is a standard work year. So 40 hours a week, 50 weeks, 2,000. That person's getting 20 grand, 4 times the national average. So not only do we get the benefit of our arbitrage in terms of pay, my VA has a 4-year degree in information technology. So you get the very top of the talent pool when you're hiring someone through these freelancer sites from some of these other parts of the world. So there's no reason at all that you shouldn't have a virtual assistant. They'll free up your life, even if you don't earn the extra hour and you get an hour back of your life to spend with your kids or your spouse. That's well worth the investment in getting help around you. So anything that causes you to say, oh shit, there's an answer. There's somebody who can do that work for you, who's better trained and qualified, and will do it at a fraction of what you'd have to pay yourself or what you'd pay someone domestically to do that work.
I agree with you 100%. I actually have 2 VAs that are in the Philippines, so I know exactly what you're talking about. What do you say, though, or how do you deal with, again, this is a mindset problem, but a contractor that's like, I hear what you're saying, makes perfect sense, but I just can't afford right now. I just can't afford that extra cost to hire an assistant, whether in person or virtual, doesn't matter. I just can't afford that. So in other words, they're seeing it as an expense. Like, how do you handle that situation, that conversation?
Well, what I'd say if you're saying that to me or you're saying that to yourself, you're jumping over dollars to get to nickels. Yes, it's an expense, but what does that free you up to do? If you spent $100, let's say $150 for 10 hours of VA work, and that was 10 hours that you were free to do something else, what would you do with those 10 hours that would produce more value? If you got one more customer every 2 weeks because you had 20 hours available to look after customers, would that pay for the $300 it cost you to hire the VA? It's not a cost. It's an investment, and the investment pays dividends in Benjis and hundreds of dollars. You're jumping over Benjis to get to dollars. It's false thinking.
Yeah.
And there's a fear around it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about on the other side of this, because I have clients that go through. I think everybody goes through it. I went through it myself, but you put systems in place, you're building this business, and everything's working really well. And now all of a sudden, you have free time. You have an extra 10 hours a week, 15, maybe 20 hours a week, and all of a sudden, you feel like you're not contributing. You feel like you're not producing. Like you feel guilty because you actually have more time. How do you advise clients that are going through that transition?
Yeah. Let's talk about what are the first few words that come to mind for you when I say the word money. So how does an employee think about money? They think about a salary. They trade their time for money. So how does a self-employed person think about money? Well, they make money. It's a different word, isn't it? They're not trading. They actually create money. So how does a business owner think about money? Well, they have an arm's length entity from which they receive profits. How does an investor think about money? They think about return on investment. And so how does an entrepreneur think about money? They don't work for money. Money works for them. So you know the story of the guy who wins the lottery, and 5 years later, that guy is broke. Because the average middle-class person, what do you do with money? You spend it. You buy trucks, you buy toys, and 5 years later, that guy's broke. Now, if I gave that lottery winning to Warren Buffett, what would he do with that money?
Oh, turn it into billions.
So, yeah. So if you're defining value in terms of using tools, or value gets created in lots of different ways. How often is the owner of a McDonald's restaurant in the restaurant? As little as they want.
You don't buy a McDonald's because you want to work in it.
Because they're an investor. They're investor owners. And so they think about value differently than you. And if you're feeling guilty, it's likely because you haven't yet recognized or developed the mindset of what it means to be an investor owner. And that value can look differently at that level than it does when you're a chuck in a truck, if I can use a crude phrase.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's a mindset. It's a shift. You have to think about how, and I was listening to a book, I think it was Rocket Fuel. He was talking about this. You know, there's value. Yeah, it was, because there's value as a creative in your business. There's creative value. So, even if you're sitting on a beach, drinking Mai Tais, but you're thinking about a new product, a new service, or something new, that's creative value. Yes, you're not being paid directly for that time, but you're investing time that's going to later pay dividends in that creative value. And I don't think a lot of people think about the fact that there is value to creating things in your business.
That's exactly right. So for them, creative usually involves tools and materials. We're now talking about value in terms of ideas, right? In terms of ideas and being able to execute on those ideas. Jeff Bezos started with a door on sawhorses. That was his desk. And his idea was he was going to sell books on the internet. And he kept pushing that idea to today. He's one of a handful of the wealthiest guys. Now, why is he that wealthy? Because he created that much value. He only owns 16% of Amazon. But in the process of creating that value, not only did he create riches for himself, but created riches for tons and tons of people that were part of the process of building Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're getting close to the end here, John. I always like to ask this question. What's a question I didn't ask you that I should have, or you think is important to discuss?
I'll take this in a little bit of a different direction. So my coaching business is called W5 Coaching. And I've already described the Socratic method of teaching, and that means helping people figure it out for themselves. And how do you do that? Well, you guide a conversation through the questions that you consider, questions that you ask. And the 5 core questions all start with a W: who, what, when, where, why. And so that's the essence of coaching. And if that helps you remember W5 and what it's about, then that's the experience that you'll have. And so the question you might have asked is, what's your style of coaching? And it's the Socratic method.
I like it. I like it a lot. One more question I always ask everyone is, what's a book that you're currently reading, or one that you would recommend?
There's a podcast I'm going to recommend called Built to Sell.
Okay.
So John Worrell wrote a book called Built to Sell, and it was based on it. It's written in an apocryphal kind of style, but it's based on his experience of growing and building a business and wanting to sell a business and then learning that the business at that stage wasn't very sellable, and he worked at it for another 3 years. So Built to Sell, there's 300-400 episodes. Every week, it's a conversation with a business owner who built a business and eventually sold that business, and all the lessons along the way of what it meant to start, grow, scale, and prepare that business for ultimately a sale. The podcast sometimes is about founders, sometimes it's about acquirers, buyers of businesses. Sometimes it's about what it's like after you've sold your business and the mindset shift that takes place. And it also does a lot of teaching about how to think about negotiating and so forth. So it's one of my go-tos each week is to listen to the current edition every Thursday. What's the Built to Sell episode this week?
That's great. I don't think I realized that he had a podcast. I read the book, but I didn't know he had a podcast.
Oh, it's super interesting.
I'll definitely have to check that out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, John, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your knowledge. If somebody wants to learn more about your business, what's the best way to do that?
W5 Coaching. I'm easy to find. John at w5coaching.com, w5coaching.com. Just remember the Socratic method and who, what, when, where, why.
Awesome. We'll put the links in the show notes for John and his business so you can go check him out if you want to learn more about his services. Guys, that's the end of the show. You know where to find me. You can check all the socials, or you can go to the show notes, search for the Hammer and Grind podcast. And remember, until next time, profit is not a dirty word.